Welcome back to the New-vember challenge. This is day 19, and today is a great example of why I've kind of transitioned somewhat to watching and streaming films before I buy them, particularly if we're talking about Vinegar Syndrome. In this case, we're talking about an Arrow release called the Duce tapes, and it's about a shock rock group from the 80s and 90s called the Mentors. They're a garage band with what appears to me to be very little talent that kind of got a little bit of 15 minutes of fame by coming up with really shocking lyrics. Rape. They promoted rape, or promoted. I mean, it was all kind of a show, in my opinion. Rape, homophobia, stuff like just anything that could rile an audience and get a reaction. Clearly, that's what they were going for. And I think their 15 minutes of fame probably wouldn't even been 15 minutes had people not reacted. I mean, it's very much, to me, analogous to the video nasties list. I mean, a lot of those films probably would have never gotten seen, for the most part, had they not made the list and been promoted by the government, the British government. So it just works in reverse. And that's what they were going for. I mean, had these guys, the Mentors, been ignored and laughed at, which probably what should have happened, then we would have never gotten this documentary from Rodney Asher and David Lawrence. Rodney Asher and David Lawrence did some really interesting documentaries. They did Room 237. So these guys are good, and this documentary is good. It's just that after about 15-20 minutes, I'd seen all I needed to see. I mean, it isn't enough material of any interest. I mean, it's clear what they were doing with the El Duce is just kind of a drunk. I mean, a lazy drunk that really never really wanted to work. I mean, he had no talent. So he found his niche somehow, and but it didn't help him. I mean, apparently at the end he was drunk and supposedly died on railroad tracks, just drunk, pissed up, and drunk. So he had a relatively short life, and honestly, I mean, he was not very interesting. Even though I think the documentary was very good, it was much more interesting to me to watch how people reacted to this. It's one of those people. There was groupies that loved him, loved the Mentors, and then there's the people that were just filled with hate just because of his lyrics and the way he was trying to get them all riled up. It didn't rile me up. I mean, I knew what he was doing, but it just back then, you have to also remember, I think in the 80s and 90s, we had Morton Downey Jr. and then following that, right, Shock TV was big. Morton Downey Jr. was when it really kind of, to me, started it. He was kind of a loudmouth, and he would get people on his show. Very much kind of a precursor to Jerry Springer. But much more over the edge. Much more over the edge. He would cuss people out and scream and yell, and it was all just show. So I just think at the end of the day that El Duce just wasn't interesting enough or compelling enough for me to buy the Arrow Blu-ray of this. I certainly wouldn't do that. But yeah, I mean, it was an interesting one-time watch. I give it a 4 out of 10, just because I think the subject matter really didn't warrant a documentary, and at least for me it didn't. But shock rock existed, and probably still does. I don't know if the Mentors carried on after El Duce passed, but who knows? And actually, who cares? That's going to do it for November 19th, and I appreciate you watching.